Well, good afternoon, folks, and welcome to episode 191 of the Sticks and the Six podcast. It's been a couple weeks since we've been on. Peter, you've been on LTIR for us, and we've just I didn't do many individual episodes. I feel like people get bored with this mug sometimes, so we just closed it out for a couple weeks, put it up on the shelf, and we are back now with episode 191 as we close in on that 200 mark. Obviously, folks, if you're listening, if you're tuning in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are now just 24 away from 200 subscribers over on YouTube, so we want to push that needle just a little bit. As always, we are brought to you by the fine folks at the Hockey Podcast Network, as well as DraftKings, SeatGeek, No Name Hockey, and BioSteel. Before we get into all the fun conversation we have surrounding the Leafs trade deadline, the possibilities, the things that could have happened, and the folks that are still in blue and white, Peter, how you doing, my friend?
Yeah, it really feels great to be off the LTIR, man. Honestly, it's been a rough couple of weeks being weak with the little dental surgery that I had. And yeah, I felt like I was getting a little bit better every single week, but at the same time, still a little bit weak, still a little bit tired. You know, they had to cut my jaw, make some stitches and everything like that. Also didn't want anything to fall off and limit my movement during live taping like this. I don't know if anybody wanted me to see pull stitches out of my mouth. I don't think that's, some kind of horror movie or something like that. So, yeah, I'm feeling much better, feeling great. And it kind of sucks that I had to deal with the surgery around trade deadline because of everything that was going on. It's an important time of year and just being able to recover. But you know what? It was towards the tail end of my recovery. So I was able to get a whole lot of, content out as well. A lot of my thoughts as well. Just really happy to be back talking hockey, talking about what transpired and what could have happened. So yeah, good to be back right now.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things like if you're doing like obviously writing for the hockey writers, you can do podcasting for the Hockey Podcast Network. Not quite easy when you have dental surgery.
Different, yeah.
Could have been anything else, but it was dental surgery. Couldn't get you on, but that's fine. We put you on LTIR. We looked around. There was no deals to be made to kind of fill in that available salary.
I'm basically the trade deadline acquisition. I'm the own rental.
That's right. Yeah, I was gonna say. I'll tell you, it's not that much when it comes to salary, but it's something. It's something. Anyways, funny story. I'll give you a quick funny story. Any of those dads out there, they'll understand. Anybody who doesn't have kids, it's a little insight into having kids. I got a quick text as I was jumping on the air here from my wife. She's upstairs with the kids. My daughter, no nap today. So 2-year-old, no nap, not a good thing. Needs the nap. Anyways, they're up there painting. My daughter got some little bites, a little bag of little bites. She was going through those, wanted to dip her brownie in the chocolate sauce. The chocolate sauce is not chocolate sauce. The chocolate sauce is brown paint. And
ooh,
my wife followed up your daughter wanted to dip her brownie in chocolate sauce with, and then she ate it. So little insight into having kids and what it can be like. Fortunately, it's non-toxic paint. So
that's a good sign. That's
another lesson for any of the dads out there. Non-toxic paint is a lot better than you think. Have it around, make sure. Anyways, fun little story to start the show. But
I was about to say, I mean, I ate crayons and markers as a kid. Not gonna lie, I did some pretty stupid things as a kid. So yeah, I feel like it's kind of like the equivalent to eating or like accidentally eating paint. So
yeah, dipping it in the chocolate sauce, man. It's what the thing is. It's like my daughter is so much more like me personality wise. So it's like I just all of it just kind of comes in and I see it and it's like, man,
see you in her, right?
How am I still alive today?
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, she'll be all right. She'll be all right.
Good to hear.
Anyways, we got a lot to talk about. We're going to try and keep it as condensed of an episode as we can, getting back into it. The trade deadline obviously passed in our 2-week hiatus. The Leafs were pretty active, albeit everyone was panicked leading up to it, thinking like, what the hell are these guys going to do? How come they haven't done a move? Brad Treliving, where the fuck are you? Let's get on the clock. Let's get on the phone.
Twitter.
Let's make some calls.
Twitter, man. Everybody was wondering, Tree, what are you doing? Come on, it's 1-2 o'clock and you still haven't done anything, kind of thing.
If you didn't think that Twitter was a dumpster fire with the American politics that were going on it right now,
Oh,
Twitter was a dumpster fire when it came to Leaf fans
especially.
panicking about the deadline.
Oh yeah, it's always the same thing every year, and knowing Tree and how kind of not necessarily conservative that he's been, but he tends to make more of those depth moves.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of resonated that, like, okay, were we really going to be on Scott Laughton? Were we going to be in all these other names where we had to pay a premium price for? Everyone was questioning about that, and Tree came through. He made some really big moves, and those are the moves that you needed to make if you wanted to keep up with the division. It's something that he had to do. Again, if you want to be all in, kind of like what Julian Breezeball said, not interested in picks and prospects right now. I'm
Mm-hmm.
in it to win it, and as much as great of a deal that Bjorkstrand and Gord move was, Bjorkstrand does fit the top six. Gord, maybe not the same Yanni Gord that they
It's
had
a
in the
welcome
two.
back.
It
It's a welcome
is,
back,
but it's still
right?
a good depth addition, right? So
Yeah.
if you're one of those teams that are in the hunt for the playoffs or want to be a contender, you got to go through with it. You got to make a tough decision. You got to pay up, unfortunately.
So all of this is going to kind of lead into the Leafs deadline moves, and obviously you kind of touched on Lawton, and we'll touch on Carlo as well. But um, you mentioned the Tampa Bay move, what they did to kind of bolster their depth. The Florida Panthers. One, we should note they lost Aaron Ekblad for 20 games because of substances,
Mm-hmm.
banned substances, which he has, to his credit, has taken full responsibility for. Said
Possibility. Yep.
he should have checked with medical staff to see what was in the stuff that he was taking prior to taking anything um, on his way back from an injury. Which we've seen that before with Nate Schmidt back
Mm-hmm.
I want to say 3 or 4 seasons ago, but in saying that, they did add Seth Jones. They've put Matthew Tkachuk on long term IR. They added Nico Sturm. They've added pieces. They added Brad Marchand, which was a huge surprise for a
Believe
conditional
Vitek
second round
Vanacek
pick.
as well.
Vitek Vanacek as well,
Yeah.
with obviously Spencer Knight going to Chicago. So a lot of moving pieces here in the Atlantic Division. These are the top three teams we're talking about: Florida, Tampa Bay, Toronto. These are the top three teams in the Atlantic Division. It's going to be a crazy fight in this division come playoff time. The Leafs, obviously, we continue to talk about how they are right there for the division win. They've dropped off a little bit with a three game losing streak following the deadline. So there are some question marks on where the Leafs are going to finish and who they're going to play in the first round. Likely going to be one of those two teams, right, from
Mm-hmm.
the Florida Sun Belt there. In saying that, what was your take as soon as you saw the Brad Marchand move? Not only is the Rat staying in the Atlantic Division, but now you've got him and Sam Bennett, and let's be honest, likely Matthew Tkachuk at some point when the playoffs start. Very Mark Stone-ish type of move here for the Florida Panthers, but you're likely going to see Matthew Tkachuk along with those two now in Florida, now with the Florida Panthers. Bob's got to be great again, though. Bob's got to be great if they want
Mm-hmm.
this to work. Aaron Ekblad's due back, game 3 of the first round. What was your thinking when you saw Brad Marchand heading to the Florida Panthers?
Quickly to touch up on Bob, he's got to be great because there were some of those goals against the Boston Bruins last night where didn't look so good, and Boston
Mm-hmm.
came back, with a 3-2 win. So big news right there for Toronto in a pivotal divisional matchup, kind of like a playoff game heading into their matchup against Florida tomorrow. Or Thursday, if it is on Thursday, tonight, whatever.
They have 3 games against the Panthers to close out the year. So
That's basically a
very
playoff
big
series right
points.
there.
That's a 6-point swing if you can lock up all 6 points.
That is a playoff series right there. That is playoff mentality at your finest. And to go back to your question about Marchand, I literally said this has to be some kind of cruel and sick, twisted joke between the Florida Panthers and Boston Bruins, basically. I mean, you have public enemy number 1 against the Leafs going against two public, like the enemy that everyone has their eyes set on to try and dethrone as a Stanley Cup chance with the Florida Panthers. And the Panthers have had the Maple Leafs numbers since that 2023 series where they lost in 6 games. Not ideal. But then again, I feel like obviously it is a big move for the Florida Panthers. Don't get me wrong. Brad Marchand's going to fit in well with that top 6, and that rat line is just going to be an absolute nuisance to go up against. But let's keep in mind, this isn't the same Brad Marchand that we have seen in years. It kind of feels like he's taken a step back. He is coming back from an injury. He looked a little bit shaken up. And I kind of felt like that game against the Maple Leafs, where it was on home ice, Matthew Nice had that hat trick, and I think Austin Matthews made a big hit, or even if it was Mitch Marner, a big hit on Marchand. And he kind of looked up and saw who it was, and I think he was kind of surprised to see that it was one of the star players to make that hit. And he had nothing but high praise to say about their team throughout the whole entire season right now. So obviously it's a big move, but one that's going to cause a big thorn in the side because of the history that Brad Marchand has against the Maple Leafs. And now that, there's a likely or a potential matchup between the two teams, you're getting a player from a team that's giving you so much heartache over the past few years onto a team that's giving you heartache presently or in the present time right now. So obviously difficult to, wrap my head around. But then again, as soon as we heard about the Brandon Carlo news right after, I kind of felt like, okay, this could kind of alleviate some of that peskiness where Brandon Carlo is a no-nonsense type of defender where he could shut things down, he can hit, he could get into lanes, block shots, and just make life miserable for forwards in front of the net. So, that initial news did sting. It sucked, and I think everybody was just in shambles at being like, just give Florida the cup again. But you kind of had something to counteract that with the move that followed after that. But at the same time, good move for Florida. I mean, Tkachuk is on LTIR, but when they come back, that Bennett, Marchand, Tkachuk line is just going to be an absolute pain in the ass to go up against. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the same boat as you. I immediately thought like this has got to be some kind of sick joke, and then I jumped back to our preseason episode where we talked about, the Boston Bruins and how the Swayman negotiations changed the culture in that room. Right?
Yeah.
You went from a team where players were taking team friendly deals, and there was a nucleus in that roster. Right? You had the Marchand, you had Zdeno Chara, you had Patrice Bergeron, you had David Krejci. To all of a sudden now you've got a team that is just ready to blow it up, and the guys that are leaving are guys from that former nucleus. The guys that are staying are the guys that are basically not taking hometown discounts, but they're taking deals that they would rightfully get on the open market. So the Charlie McAvoys, the David Pasternaks, and of course the Jeremy Swaymans. And we said it in the preseason. The culture shift is going to affect this team in a negative way. And that's why you saw guys like Charlie Coyle's gone, Brad Marchand's gone, Brandon Carlo's gone. They've traded away pieces that have made this team a reliable contender for the last decade and a half, right? And now, I mean, Marchand stays in the Atlantic Division. You've got a rat playing in a city that throws rats on the ice. It almost seems fitting. And he was obviously emotional and everything with the deal. I think he felt a little blindsided by it, judging by the conversations he had afterwards. That said, I think they knew that there was a deal that was imminent, and it probably involved him. And he talked about it with some of his teammates in Boston that there's a chance that he's on his way out, and so be it. And let's note too that he is a free agent at the end of the year. He could very much re-sign in Boston if that all worked out. But to trade your captain, the way that it went down, I don't know if he would go back to that. I mean, hell, you could see him maybe playing with fellow Nova Scotian in Colorado at some point. Maybe him and Nathan McKinnon get it going next season on a nice little deal as well. But yeah, definitely a surprise. Definitely prior to the Tree Living moves, seeing Marchand kind of go was a big like, oh shit moment.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing too was I find it very coincidental where I think Boston didn't want to trade him to an Atlantic Division rival. Yet in the end, they traded him to an Atlantic Division rival. I mean, it really is kind of one of those like ironic kind of things where you just contradicted yourself, really.
Yeah. I mean, okay, without getting into the Leafs moves, because we're going to get that in a second, knowing what we've seen with Tampa Bay, knowing what we've seen with Florida, what's your feeling on the Leafs in terms of their competitiveness with those two teams going into the playoffs? Because we know the Leafs are likely going to meet one of them at some point, if not in the first round, at some point in the playoffs. I personally would love to go up against Tampa Bay. I think the Florida Panthers right now. And can we both agree that Matthew Tkachuk's coming back game 1 or game 2 of the playoffs?
Oh, absolutely.
Is
There's
it
no
fair
doubt.
to assess that the reason he was put on LTIR was clear cap circumvention in trying to get a guy like Seth Jones and bring him in, and then obviously Marchand, who, you know, realistically they're only paying Marchand, I believe. I read like 275,000 of his overall salary this
Hmm.
season.
Yeah,
So
I just read up on that right now too.
yeah, incredible deal,
Yeah.
incredible deal.
I will say that with Chicago, I don't think that there was a team out there. I mean, Florida probably would be the only team because they did have Kachuk on LTIR where you had to eat a significant amount of that contract because I don't
Mm-hmm.
think any team is going to take on anything less than what he's making right now. Um, yeah, a significant chunk had to be made, but I think that was a big win for the Chicago Blackhawks to get that deal off their books where you do have a starter in Spencer Knight now where he's looking pretty sharp right now. Obviously, the Hawks are still in a rebuild, but you got a goaltender that's getting that opportunity and playtime to be a starter. The Aaron Ekblad situation does throw a wrench into the whole Seth Jones thing because Seth Jones is the starter in Chicago. Um, wasn't really up to being on that or living up to first pairing kind of duties. Now I think with Ekblad out of the fold, you kind of need someone to move up into the lineup
Mm-hmm.
and just don't know for sure if Seth Jones is going to be that guy, if you could rely on him to get more minutes like you did in Chicago, because you could get the same kind of play that he has right now. And then again, I said this too. Seth Jones in Chicago, his play, not great at all, but it could definitely change on a Stanley Cup caliber team like the Florida Panthers. Now, with one of your guys gone, what's going to happen to Seth Jones's minute? Because I think they brought him in as kind of like an OEL type player, limited minutes in a third pairing role, or like, like in that 4 to 6 kind of role, and be a factor, but not over strenuate him with his minutes and his competition. Um, I think that now that kind of changes things, and you got to see what he's going to do now in an elevated role on the Florida Panthers. Because again, two different teams, two different markets. Is the pressure going to be on him now again to be that top defender again, or is he still going to be, going to be dialed back a little bit? Paul Maurice is going to do what he can to get the best out of him, but in a better, more composed kind of way. That's the big question I have. Obviously, the Panthers, their moves move the needle. The Maple Leafs definitely made those moves to counteract what Florida did, what Tampa did. Obviously, the Brad Marchand one stings a little, but the Scott Laughton gives them depth up the middle. They needed a third center. They needed a depth defender. I didn't think they would go after a top 4 defender, which is kind of a shock. But at the same time, those moves do move the needle. They make Toronto competitive against their competition, where they just didn't sit back. They went all in and got quality players for quality prices.
Yeah.
So in essence, yeah, it really does move the needle for all three teams, but they're all neck and neck right now where, Florida added up front and on the back end. Toronto added up front on the back end. Tampa Bay added some more depth. Is it going to be enough for Tampa Bay? Because we know how they were on a hot stretch, but now it seems like they're starting to go on a little bit of a cold streak right now. So everything's going to play out differently down the stretch, but the moves definitely keep Toronto within the competition to battle for that top spot in the Atlantic.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think the one thing I'll say about Florida is it'll certainly be nice, and I'm in no way saying that there's a conspiracy at any point in this, but it's going to be nice getting Aaron Ekblad back for Game 3, well rested and 100% healthy in round 1 of the playoffs. I think that's going to be a huge help for the Florida Panthers, and if Seth Jones can kind of carry that torch for the next couple weeks heading into the playoffs, I think it's a win-win for the Florida Panthers. Um, the Toronto Maple Leafs obviously made a couple of deals late in the deadline. Like I said off the top of the show, we were all sitting back kind of saying, I know I put my phone away at one point saying, what the hell, Brad Treliving's not making a single move here. It's insane. But the word is that they were after Braden Shen. That kind of fell through, which is when they turned their focus onto Scott Laughton. And obviously a Toronto boy getting Scott Laughton for him to come and play for his childhood team. We've seen it not work out in the past with Ryan O'Reilly, who once again this season, stood by his statement that he does not want to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is fine.
Fair.
Ryan, enjoy the no playoffs in Nashville. I'm sure Nashville is a beautiful city.
No animosity
it is.
here. We fully understand.
I've been. So, enjoy that. We will continue to go for the playoffs. We're going to bring in Scott Laughton, and Scott Laughton is a guy who can be that depth player. He can play the tough minutes. He can play the tough situations. What they gave up for Scott Laughton, Nikita Grabenkin, obviously a guy who, you know, fans enjoyed his short stint with the Leafs this year. He had a little bit of fire. What is it? Back check, forecheck, paycheck.
Paycheck.
So
Yep.
I mean, he had some bangers when it came to quotes, um, but obviously, with the recent addition that they made of that free agent signing as well, I think there's a similarity in terms of their play. They were able to move Nikita Grabenkin, they were able to move a conditional first round pick, and they bring in a guy with term. And I think that's the biggest note. What were your thoughts on Scott Laughton coming in for the Maple Leafs?
Yeah, it seemed like it was either Braden Shen or Scott Laughton. It was one of those two players. And I think with Berube having experience with both players, I think they would have fit well in the system regardless. Both play with that intensity, that edge, that drive, that intensity. It really makes them well known and a factor on the ice with their physicality. Um, it kind of, again, you had to pay that price. If it was a first plus a prospect, it depended on who that prospect was going to be. It wasn't any of the big three, which one of them got dealt later on in Fraser Minton, but at the same time, it hurts because Grabenka was becoming a fan favorite. I was from the very beginning. I said he was going to be a fan favorite. He was becoming that in Toronto. Philadelphia Flyer fans, I guarantee you are going to love Nikita Grabenkin. Um, Based on that comment, the forecheck, back check, paycheck kind of thing.
Yeah.
Even Tree alluded to it when he traded for him. I kind of felt like it was going to be a first and a third, but I think the Flyer scouts, from what I've read online, it kind of felt like they sensed that Grabenkin was going to be the equivalent to that third round pick.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why they traded him. And in essence, I kind of understand that because they're in that window where you need some picks, but you want to start building for the future as well because you already have some pieces in place. And not only that, Grabenkin knows Michkov very well, so there's that familiarity right there. It sucks to see him go, but at the same time, I'm happy with the Scott Laughton acquisition. The first round picks are going to be late round picks for the Maple Leafs. You could be willing to part with those anyways because it's going to be like one of those Easton Cowan, Fraser Minton kind of players. Cowan, different situation. But, it's one of those prices where I feel comfortable giving up because it's not a top 15 lottery pick kind of play or a top 16 lottery pick situation. It's well past that. You're in a competitive window. You have to pay that price, like I said off the top of the show. But Laughton himself, he fits the bill. This is a guy that can play center wing. They're going to utilize him more as a center, move Max Domi to the wing. Plays with that intensity. He could play PK. He could chip in offensively every now and then. He could be a second power play kind of guy. Rough couple of games to start. I thought he looked much better in Utah than he did in Colorado. And I love the fact that he took ownership about his play against Colorado. Then again, I'm not fully blaming Scott Laughton for coming into this game without having a practice, without knowing the team system and everything like that. It seemed like, rough start, but he kind of settled in where he was using that physicality.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the fourth line wasn't that great, but I thought the Maple Leafs got their footing a little bit more as the game progressed, but they were chasing it from the very beginning. But I like the edge that he brought. And I also love Berube saying that, he's kind of hard on himself. He's very sure as an assistant coach, coached them in the past. I'm going to double check that quote later on. But yeah, I love the fact that he's showing that accountability that everyone in Leafs Nation wants to see from their players, despite not getting any practice time or, getting any chemistry whatsoever. But I love that from Laughton. I love the edge. And now with a few games under his belt, hopefully we can see a little bit more and he elevates that play.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it was a big move to bring somebody. They needed some depth. They need some physicality. They needed a playoff type of player, and I think Scott Laughton kind of exudes all of that. In terms of Grabenkin, I'm glad you brought up the relation to Michkov. I think that was an important move, and that's why they wanted Grabenkin partially as well. And at the same time, as much as I love the play that we saw from Grabenkin, I think giving up that prospect gives you a little bit of an open door to kind of build more depth within your prospect pool and allows you to have more, bring in some free agents. The collegiate avenue is going to be a lot different this year as well, with some of the CHL players going down there. You're going to get to see a little bit more. There's going to be some free agents coming out of the collegiate program that the Leafs might be interested in. That opens the door for them to sign those players as well, moving a guy like Grebenkin. So
Mhm.
I don't
I
think they
wonder if
gave
the
up too.
signing of Boreavalis played a factor in that as well.
Well, and that's that. I was kind of alluding to that earlier. Is I think that did play a part because their style of play is very similar,
Mm-hmm.
right? Very kind of boom and crash, and with a little bit of offensive upside as well. So I think that gave them the opportunity and allowed them to feel comfortable with moving on from Gurbankin, because they know they have a player coming in that has a similar style of play, albeit maybe no NHL experience. I think that's kind of a moot
Probably
point when it
projects a
comes
little
to
bit
it.
more than Grebenkin. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that gave them the opportunity to move on from him. Again, I don't think I think at the cost of what players were going for at the deadline, I think the Leafs made a great deal in acquiring Scott Laughton. He's got term. It's not expensive. And
I was
yeah,
just
go
about to say,
ahead.
considering some of the prices that we've seen for other forwards, I would take that deal any day of the week over, like, maybe a second for Brandon Tanev or other moves that were made previously. So yeah, no,
Yeah,
no, no. I was just going to build off what you said about the pricing.
absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, we saw a very similar thing when Tree acquired Brandon Carlo as well, right? So
Mm-hmm.
obviously you get your depth forward in Scott Laughton, one of the holes that this team has been um, notorious for needing. And then you go out and you solidify that back end. You move guys like Connor Timmins and Connor Dewar, which, let's be honest, they weren't going to get full fledged opportunities with this organization. I mean, Timmins got a great opportunity this season, but they went out and extended Philip Myers, so Philip Myers is definitely going to be their guy. And then you've got Simone Benoit, who, I mean, Superman flying in with that flying punch.
That killed
Maybe
me, man.
maybe the capture of the year was that photo from the front end where he's up in the air, just it was perfect. It was
We have to
perfect.
add that to the Anthony Stolars grabbing the puck with his bare hand pick and just putting that in the Louvre right there.
Yeah,
Like those were
absolutely.
two iconic pictures from this season for the Leafs. There's no doubt
Absolutely.
about
I
that.
got I got to print one of those out and get Simone Benoit to sign that. But anyways, those were the guys, and then to add Brandon Carlo into the mix as well, another guy with size, physicality, and tough to play against. He's got reach on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you give up a guy in Fraser Minton, which I think everyone's kind of sad to see that prospect go. There's a lot of hype around him, but at this point in time, he's projecting to be a third line center. And I think that is what the Leafs saw him as, and that was their reasoning to move him rather than a guy like Easton Cowan.
Yeah.
Fair?
No, absolutely fair. I mean, so before that even happened, there was that tweet from Joshua Cloak where he said, barring one phone call, Ben Danford and Easton Cowan are still in the system. He didn't mention Fraser Minton.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me alone kind of got me. I even replied back. I'm like, Fraser Minton, question mark. Kind of felt like, why would you leave him out? Now we know why, kind of thing. That to me was kind of one of those cryptic messages. And then I had like everyone like message me, like friends, colleagues, whatever. They're like, what's going to happen now? And I'm just like, you know what? It wouldn't surprise me if Minton is the guy going into Carlo deal. When the news
Yeah.
broke, they're saying that is Cowan involved. I'm like, I don't see that. There's no way. He's got term, but top four defender, more of a shutdown kind of guy, not an offensive defenseman. That's the only kind of player I would trade Easton Cowan for,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
involve in a package for a massive deal. But yeah, no, like you said, Minton is going to carve out as a third line center. You're going to find multiple players like that throughout the draft that could fill in a 3C role, move up and down the lineup kind of thing. And I thought he took tremendous strides this season. I really did. I thought he looked very noticeable. And even during the game where I saw with Laval Rocket and Toronto Marlies, Minton, Alex Dees, by far the best players on the ice. It is difficult to see him go because I interviewed him when he got drafted. Nicest kid that, very modest, very mild mannered, and he composes himself that way both on and off the ice. But he's got that attention to detail. He's very aggressive with his forecheck and everything like that. So he basically fits the Boston Bruins mold. Definitely feels like a Bruins type player. But yeah, I mean, basically a third line center and a first round pick for Brandon Carlo. Again, big win. Uh, Obviously, the fact that he's under contract for another year or two basically is what Brad Treliving wanted. You don't want to go out and get rental players. You want to go out and get guys that could be in it for the long haul, and those are players that could make an immediate impact. And I mean, I was rolling as I did my recap. I was scrolling through like Brandon Carlo's defensive pairings. There's Nikita Zadorov, he spent with most of the time with Jordan Esterly. He even spent time with Hampus Lindholm. And although his numbers with Zadorov and Esterly weren't that great, his numbers with Hampus Lindholm were very strong. In terms of shot attempts, goals for and against, expected goals for, scoring chances, they were a decent line. So I kind of felt that Brandon Carlo pairing up with Morgan Rielly and seemed like one of those pairings that should happen because we've seen how many defensive partners Morgan Rielly has had. He's had shutdown defenders with him, but a lot of them were further along in their career. Ron Hainsey, Matt Hunwick. Nikita Zaitsev was a little bit younger, but it didn't quite work out as the contract didn't quite fit the bill or his play fit the bill. So now having a steady presence like Brandon Carlo, who has some mobility but has a defensive awareness to let Morgan Rielly be a little bit more free, I think that's a perfect balance right then and there. I think that's something that could work or pay dividends for this team going forward. And obviously, rough couple of games, but I kind of felt that they start again. The numbers aren't there right now through 29 minutes at even strength. I'm looking at natural stat trick right there. But there is a lot of potential that this could be like that Luke Schenn kind of deal where you have a little bit more offensive upside, but strong on the breakouts, a player that can, be a very great partner for Rielly and, counter out what his risks with his safe decision-making. I feel like this is a really good complementary move to Morgan Rielly and for the Maple Leafs on the back end, because at the same time, I would have thought that you needed to fix that third pairing because Connor Timmins and Simon Benoit at times I was not a fan of. I felt nervous seeing them out there, and that was the case for a lot of the time. But you kind of address that right side and you push that right side and push a few other players down. Maybe Benoit sits a little bit. Maybe Philip Myers, who has looked good at times, can be that other partner for a guy like OEL on that third pairing once Chris Tanev comes back. That to me solidifies your defense where you have Rielly, Carlo, Tanev, McCabe, and OEL, Myers, Benoit rotating in and out. That to me seems like a very solid, steady back end and fits the mantra of the Maple Leafs defense where they're heavy on pucks, they break plays up, they defend against the rush well, and they can counteract with, some good transitional and rush plays. So to me, that was a big win for the Maple Leafs right then and there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's safe, too, to say that having traded him in division, that for his first game against the Toronto Maple Leafs, Fraserman's going to tuck for the Boston Bruins. I think that's
always the case. Yeah,
that's always the case. But
bet
anyways,
on that.
Perfect segue into our quick ad read from the DraftKings Sportsbook as well. This NHL season has been as predictable as a puck rolling on its edge. No one knows where it's going, but that just means there's time for your favorite team to figure things out. And games left for you to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. And if you are new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet just $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER in New York. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in Connecticut. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. New customers only. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. NHL and the NHL Shield are registered trademarks of the National Hockey League. NHL and NHL team marks are the property of the NHL and its teams. Copyright NHL 2025. All rights are reserved. Anyways, Laughton, Carlo are in. The one deal that didn't get done that there was a lot of speculation around was Mikko Rantanen joining the blue and white. 3 possible deals were on the table. One involved Easton Cowan, Fraser Minton, and a couple first-round picks. One involved Mitch Marner waiving his no-trade clause, and that seemed to be the one that the Carolina Hurricanes really wanted. They wanted Mitch Marner in return. They wanted to sign him to a long-term deal. They wanted him in Carolina. Brad Treliving and his staff approached Mitch Marner about his no-trade clause. He turned it down and has every right to. We've seen this in the past with Matt Sundin turning down a trade at the tail end of his deal. Mitch Marner's reasoning, he wants to be in Toronto long term. Where do we go from here, Peter?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of speculation right now that this was kind of like a safeguard move, because if the Maple Leafs did, make that deal for Rantanen, I'm pretty sure Mikko Rantanen probably would have signed here in Toronto. I mean, I think there were a few places where I know Bob McKenzie on the broadcast during trade deadline before Rantanen was dealt and signed by the or dealt to the Dallas Stars and signed by the Stars eventually. That 2 teams that would have been in on him in free agency were Toronto and Florida. And I think Toronto was still one of the teams that if there was a deal in place, he would have gone and waived to. But I guess because of that Mitch Marner no move clause, it didn't become that. It was null and void because it is definitely his right, like you said. I think the deal would have been a safeguard. That way, if they did lose Mitch, then they would have had Mikko in the fold playing alongside Matthews on that top line with Knies. Again, it kind of felt like a safeguard at the same time, but it also reminded me of the Mitch Marner situation and how this is becoming like a prolonged move, how he's going to hit the open market. And then you have Treliving come out and say, listen, we think highly of Mitch. We asked him in a respectful way. We understand he's got that no move clause, but we still want to sign him. Signing him is our priority. I think Mitch Marner's even said signing here is his priority. So the fact that they're not talking about anything mid-season, we knew about that. We knew that there was going to be no talks. We knew that there probably wasn't going to be any movement whatsoever. That was bound to happen. The fact that we're already jumping to the conclusion that he's probably going to move, it's very possible. But again, knowing Mitch Marner, knowing how he's always stated that he wants to stay here, I kind of get the sense that they will come to agreement at some point. It's just a matter they want to play this thing out to the very end, which means after the playoffs, because that's the big thing. Mitch Marner is having a hell of a season right now. I think he's probably the best player or Toronto's MVP or one of the MVPs in consideration. You could throw Anthony Stolarz, Joseph Woll, William Nylander into that conversation as well. Chris Tanev even, and Jake McCabe on how well they've played. But I think Marner being that important piece, he's on the verge of his first 100-point season. He's a player that could play in L situations, penalty kill. He's a two-way playmaking threat. You hardly see players like him anymore. And the fact that he's going to probably get a big payday, expect that to happen. Cap is going up. It's going to go up for the foreseeable future. So I even wrote an article about this where I'm drawing comparisons to the whole Vladimir Guerrero situation with the Jays, how it's an important season for Guerrero on the Jays to stay with the team. Obviously, he hasn't quite shut the door on the Jays just yet. He is going to hit the market, but he hasn't fully closed the door. Mitch Marner, I think, is adamant on staying in Toronto, and I think this whole entire move gives him leverage, just like the Jays or Vladdy with the Jays, how they were going after Juan Soto, Shohei Ohtani, that if you're going to give Mikko Rantanen $12 million or the same contract that's comparable to what he signed with Dallas, I think he's going to say, well, if you had that money, pay me kind of thing, right? I'm an important player for your team. You're like, literally, if Mitch Marner leaves, it is a big hole to fill. Whether you like him or not, whether you're going to like the contract, it is going to be irreplaceable to find another player just like him. You're going to probably have to be another top 3, top 4 pick in a draft to try and find a Mitch Marner type player. But in that essence, if he's good, I think he has that bargaining chip where he's going to go, hey, listen, had a great regular season. The hope is that he shows up in the playoffs and he's one of the key players and he has a game-breaking moment just like he did at the Four Nations. If he has those moments, then he's going to be like, yeah, I want 13, 13.5 or something equivalent to what Matthews is getting. If you're the Maple Leafs, I think you have no choice. You have to pay him. Otherwise, you're going to lose a very important player. That to me is a big move or like a big ask to try and get Mikko Rantanen. Obviously, again, Marner saying no, well within his right, but I think it shows that his commitment to this team, and not only that too, he's got a kid on it. Like it's been announced that he's going to be a father soon. He's got a kid on the way too. It's the same thing like John Tavares.
Families in the vicinity, right?
Exactly. And that's why Tavares chose to sign here in Toronto long term. I can't see him at the end of this contract signing anywhere else than Toronto because he's already he's already set up his family here. His wife works here. Mitch is going to do the same thing. Family is going to be very key and very important. So to make things work, I think you have to give him a little bit more or the equivalent to Mikko Rantanen's contract. Even if you go 12.5, even if you go 12.75, maybe you just get a shade under that 13 mil. If you need to go to the 13 million, go right ahead. Cap is going up. The league is making billions in revenue. We're seeing the projection. It's going to work out, and it's not going to handcuff the Leafs just like it did during the COVID years, which nobody foresaw coming. But at the same time, it's something that you can't ignore. Losing Mitch Marner would be a big blow to this team. I mean, you're going to move Nylander up to that spot with Auston Matthews, but now who are you going to fill in that top six role? You do not have a top six forward that could play on that second line. Could you go after a Brock Besser? You could sign him, but at the same time, it's not Mitch Marner caliber. So,
and the consistency is not there with some of those players either, right?
Exactly. At least with Mitch Marner. I was just about to say, at least with Marner, he's been a 90-point player, pushing 100. Hasn't quite hit that mark, but he could hit that mark this year. If he's very consistent, that's definitely a possibility.
Oh, we've been spoiled. We've been spoiled in Toronto with Mitch Marner over the years, and I know some people, he can be a polarizing player with some people for whatever reason. The lack of physicality, you name it. And
even the saga too, because everyone's going to draw to this as the reminiscent of the first one that he had with Kyle Dubas. But let's face it, this is a more experienced GM. This isn't Kyle
Dubas. Yeah,
unfortunately.
We're going to see things differently.
Yeah, I think Tree is definitely going to do everything in his power to try and keep him in the fold. I think that press conference, I think he needed to come out and try and lower the temperature, lower the heat on Mitch, because I think he was getting a lot of it for basically everyone complaining about his right as a player. Yeah.
Yeah, the Sundin move, yeah.
I was about to say, as much as I wanted to move on from Sundin, it was his right. It hurt, but at the same time, no move clauses. I have to be... Again, I think with Kyle Dubas and his no move clauses, that handcuffed everything with this team. You can't be willing to, if you're so set on a player staying long term, then give the no move clause. Yeah. But then again, if you're not so certain, but you still have that, doubt, there's nothing wrong with a modified one. Give me a no team trade list of like 10 or 15 that you don't want to go to. At least have that in the back pocket. At least if it's modified, you have something to work with.
Yeah, they do hand those things out like candy these days, and putting no movement clauses in every contract. But I agree with you. I think you can go around the 12.5 million mark, and you'd be content with what you get from Marner. Even if you sign him to an 8-year deal, I think you're going to be content. The problem is, and this is going to be a conversation for a long time, is that the Maple Leafs do have to pay a little bit more because we are a taxed province in Ontario. Yeah. You see Florida, you see Dallas with the $12 million contract for Rantanen. Well, it's a tax-free state. You see Florida, you see Tampa Bay, you see Vegas handing out these contracts, tax-free states. That's something that the NHL as a whole, as a business, has to figure out to create. I mean, you institute this cap to make it so that teams like Toronto can't go out and spend, $20 million on one player, because other teams could not keep up with that. Mm-hmm. In the same sense, you have to, as a business, you have to find a way to level out the playing field in terms of the taxes and the revenues and everything that happens within each individual province and state. And I think that's going to make a difference long term. But for now, I think you could get Marner locked up for a $12.5 million contract, probably over 8 years. Like we've discussed, he's got family in the area. He's a Toronto area boy. He's got a kid on the way. Speaking as a father, not one who travels all the time, but speaking as a father, to have that team around you to help you with the kids is always a bonus. You know that's going to be a focal point. The thing with players now, there is so much more focus on outside of the game as well.
Yeah.
What's going to help me outside of the game? What's going to be the best for my family outside of the game? It was the same reason we saw the late Johnny Gaudreau, God rest his soul, leave Calgary as well.
Yeah.
It was to be closer to family, and that was an important factor in his decision as well. I think in the same breath, we're going to see that play a factor in Mitch Marner's overall decision when it comes to contract talks as well. There is a small window after the season's done for them to sign him. Right, there is that small window where they can still sign him to that 8-year contract if he stays in Toronto. Once he hits the market,
As soon as the season's done, as soon as the last game of the Stanley Cup Finals played, that's when the real negotiation begins.
Yeah, 1,000%, 1,000%. Anyways, before we close it out here, the tough part for the Leafs right now, and they were at the top of the Atlantic Division. It's maybe one of the most competitive divisions in hockey right now is that Atlantic, especially with Ottawa coming up. Detroit, they're faltering a little bit, but they were right there. And even Montreal was right there. And shout out to the Montreal fans who have been with this team. And that Caulfield, Slavkovsky, Suzuki line is just
they're still fighting right now.
Unbelievable.
They're still
right
fighting.
Now.
They're still fighting. I honestly thought it was over for them a few weeks ago, but they're making their way back. They're clawing their way back.
This is going to be a scary division to be a part of over the next many seasons.
Yeah.
That said, the Leafs might have one of the toughest schedules coming up, and this is to fight for first in that division, something that's going to be very important to them come playoff time. They've got the Panthers tomorrow. They've got the division rival Senators on Saturday. They've got the Calgary Flames on Monday, who are not a tough out either. You've got Colorado
coming back again. Yeah,
coming back again next Wednesday, and then you get the Rangers, who are fighting for their playoff lives right now, on Thursday, before a little bit of a blip in your schedule. Even then, you lost to the Sharks. They're coming up again on March 27th. You've lost some of those teams that are coming up. The biggest games right now for the Leafs are going to be those divisional games. They've got 3 against the Panthers through the rest of the season. They've got 1 against Ottawa. They've got 1 against Tampa Bay. They've got 1 against Buffalo. They've got 1 against Montreal, and they have 1 against Detroit. So a lot of divisional matchups that are coming up over the next little while. This is not going to be an easy closeout to the season. They've got to have that playoff mentality now. How that affects them going into the playoffs, we'll see. But if you want to make it past that first round, you have to have that playoff mentality right now for the remainder of the season.
No, absolutely. And post deadline, they're like, I could have saw that the Maple Leafs had one of the easiest schedules, but is it really easy with the way the Atlantic Division is, with the way that some teams, even that are on the cusp of being up on the wild card spot, are fighting for their lives? Because they're just going to be just as desperate. I don't think there's no such thing as an easy stretch of schedule, especially after the trade deadline, because all the teams that are still in it, like Calgary, like you said, like New York, that are within that grasp, like Montreal, Ottawa, that are clawing for that playoff spot, Detroit even, they're going to put their best foot forward. There is no such thing as an easy game. And like you said, this has to be playoff mentality, especially when you're going up against Florida 3 times, which could be a possible first round opponent. And if you get that first seed, advantage is yours with home ice advantage. So you play that into effect where you have potential playoff matchups, potential divisional rivals that are also in the fight as well. Again, based on winning percentage, yeah, it could be, it is a little bit easier, but on paper and within the standings, I think it's going to be more tougher than it actually says. So we'll see what happens. I know that they've had a rough stretch where they did lose to the San Jose Sharks. They did blow that game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it took everything in me not to cheer and celebrate when Matthew Knies scored with like literally a buzzer beater with my jaw stitched up and everything like that. So yeah, that was, again, exciting hockey game, but I digress a little bit. But at the same time, you had winnable games that you've lost the hold of. Even that game against Colorado, you weren't playing great. You had a 4-2 lead and you ended up losing it. Those are games where they come back to bite you. And I think what really but like what really gave me some hope is that after that game, they held the players held a meeting to try and get themselves back on track. I know you had the 3-0 lead against Utah. You blew that again. but at least you salvaged it in the shootout. They need be a little bit better defensively. I think Kristaps coming back is going to be huge for that. I think once Carlo gets his feet underneath him, once he gets the hold of the practice and the system, I think it's going to be a little bit more easier for him. Same with Laughton. I think with time in the next couple of weeks, hopefully everything gels together and everything goes right. But again, nothing's easy. Nothing's going to be given to them down the stretch. They're going to have to work hard for it. And that's what's going to translate into the playoffs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just I'm dealing with a little small technical difficulty here on my end. But anyways, yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's going to be important for them to close out the season with some big wins. Outside of that, it's going to be quite the ride over the next little while. And yeah, it's gonna be some tough games, but they have to have that playoff mentality if they're gonna want to get things done. So, um, yeah, outside of that, make sure you check out the rest of the shows over at the Hockey Podcast Network. It was good getting back with you here, Peter. After a
Good to
couple
be
of weeks,
back.
I'm glad you're doing well, buddy. I'm glad you're doing well.
Thank you, man.
And make sure you check out SeatGeek. Use code Sticks in the Six IX at the end there for 20% or $20 off your first purchase over at SeatGeek, as well as BioSteel. Make sure you use the code Sticks in the Six Pod. That's STICKS INTHE 6IX POD for 20% off your purchase over at BioSteel. Outside of that, we will be back next week for more conversations here about the Leafs. We're going to see how that schedule plays out over the next week here. But until then, Peter, always fun. That's episode 191. Elbows up, baby. Elbows up.